It's our 10th anniversary, Kaylin. The guests have been asking for 2 hours, and you're acting like playing a simple Chopin nocturne is a death sentence. Are you actually going to sit at that piano, or are you going to keep hiding behind that nerve damage excuse like a coward?
I am a neurosurgeon, Zuri. My hands are my livelihood, and I won't risk a tremor just to perform like a trained monkey for your high society friends. Why is my physical pain less important to you than a 3-minute performance?
Because you used to play it for me every single night, and now you won't even touch the keys when I'm watching. It's not about the guests, Kaylin. It's about the fact that I don't recognize the man standing in front of me anymore. And that was the poison leaking through the cracks of our perfect marriage, a decade of music replaced by a clinical, hollow silence. I spent 10 years believing I was married to a man who had simply outgrown his passions, never realizing that the man I loved hadn't changed his mind. He had been replaced. But before I show you the moment, the true monster stepped out of the shadows at our dinner party. Hit that subscribe button. The ballroom of our estate was a sea of black ties and silk gowns, the air thick with the scent of expensive lilies and even more expensive lies. As an art restorer, my job is to find the truth hidden beneath layers of old, cracked paint. I should have been better at spotting the fraud in my own home. Kaylin stood there, adjusting his cufflinks, white gold, a gift for our 5th anniversary. He looked exactly like the man I'd married. The same sharp jawline, the same deep-set eyes, the same steady surgical hands. But as he turned away from me to greet the chief of surgery, I felt that familiar, cold shiver. For 10 years, Kaylin had claimed a minor surgical accident, had ended his days as a concert-level pianist. He still operated on brains with terrifying precision, but the music, that had died the day we returned from our honeymoon. "Zuri, darling, you look tense," he whispered, sliding a hand onto the small of my back. His touch was warm, but it felt like a calculation. "Smile, the board is watching. We're the golden couple, remember." I forced my lips to move, but my eyes stayed on his hands. Something was wrong. The small, jagged scar he'd had on his left thumb since childhood, the one from a slipped chisel, was gone. I'd noticed it months ago, but he'd laughed it off, saying he'd performed a micro-revision on himself to improve his grip. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. We had a legacy, 2 beautiful children, and a life built on his reputation as a medical god. But as the waiter approached with a tray of crystal flutes, I saw Kaylin's reflection in the silver tray. He wasn't looking at the guests. He was staring at the grand piano in the corner with a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. I thought he was mourning a lost talent, but as the front doors of the gala swung open and a man with his exact face walked in, I realized Kaylin wasn't mourning the music. He was terrified of the man who could still play it. I took a long sip of champagne, the bubbles burning my throat. I didn't know it yet, but the man standing next to me was about to become a stranger, and the nightmare was just beginning. The room didn't just go quiet, it went cold. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open, and for a second I thought I was seeing a ghost or a glitch in the universe. A man stood there, framed by the moonlight of the veranda. He was wearing a tattered trench coat that looked like it had been dragged through a gutter, and his face, it was Kaylin's face. But it was gaunt, scarred, and his eyes held a hollow, ancient pain that my husband's never did. "Kaylin," I whispered, my voice cracking. I looked at the man beside me, then back at the man in the doorway. My husband's reaction was instant. He didn't rush to help the man, he didn't look confused, he looked like a cornered animal. He grabbed my arm, his grip so tight it would leave bruises by morning. "Security," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Get this man out of here. He's a delusional patient from the clinic. He's been stalking me for weeks." The stranger didn't move. He didn't shout. He just looked at me, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. "Zuri," he said. His voice was a raspy version of the one I heard every morning, but it had an inflection, a softness that hit me like a physical blow. The night we got engaged on the rooftop in Florence, I whispered a name in your ear. I told you that you were my starlight artisan. Only I know that. Only Kaylin knows that. The man beside me turned a sickly shade of gray. He's lying. He's been reading my private journals. I looked at my husband, the man who had raised 2 children with me, and realized for the first time that his nerve damage wasn't in his hands, it was in his history. The security guards hesitated. You could hear a pin drop as the stranger walked past the chief of surgery, past our neighbors, and straight toward the Steinway grand piano Kaylin had avoided for a decade. My husband tried to lunge at him, but our oldest friend, a massive orthopedic surgeon, stepped in his way. Let him play, Kaylin. If he's a nutjob, he'll prove it. The stranger sat down. He didn't look at the keys, he looked at me. Then he began to play. It wasn't just music. It was a memory. He played the Rachmaninoff concerto that Kaylin used to play for me when we were dating, the one he claimed he could no longer perform because of his tremors. His fingers moved like liquid gold, hitting every complex, impossible note with a soul-deep precision that made my heart ache. I am Kaylin, the stranger said, his fingers still dancing over the ivory. The man standing in that expensive suit is Cyprian, my twin brother. 10 years ago, on our honeymoon, he drugged me. He moved me to a private facility under his own name, the name of a failed, debt-ridden dropout. He didn't just steal my money, Zuri. He stole my life. He stole you. I felt the world tilt. I looked at the husband I had slept next to for 3,650 nights. He wasn't a surgeon. He wasn't a pianist. He was a mimic who had been performing the greatest role of his life in my bed. I reached out and touched the husband's hand. It was cold. "Who are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just looked at the exit, calculating his next move while the real music of my life played from the hands of a ghost. I didn't scream. I went into restorer mode, finding the rot beneath the canvas. While the chaos erupted in the ballroom, I slipped away to the one place Kaylin, or whoever he was, always kept locked, the sub-basement storage room. I used the emergency key hidden in the fuse box. Inside, I found a filing cabinet. It wasn't full of medical journals. It was full of me. There were notebooks titled Zuri, Preferences. I opened one. It had bullet points. Likes her coffee at 140 degrees. Secretly hates lilies but pretends to like them for the aesthetic. Comfort her with a low-frequency hum when she cries. There were scripts for our most intimate moments. He had literally rehearsed how to love me. But the horror went deeper. I found a hidden drawer containing a mechanical hand stabilizer, a device surgeons use for tremors. My husband hadn't been performing surgeries with skill. He'd been using a machine to mimic his brother's genius, while the real Kaylin rotted in an asylum. Suddenly, the heavy steel door slammed shut. The electronic lock engaged with a loud thud. "I did it for us, Zuri," Caspian's voice came through the intercom, distorted and desperate. "Cyprian was a narcissist. He didn't deserve you. I gave you a perfect life. I gave the kids a father who was actually there. Don't ruin the family for a man who hasn't seen the sun in 10 years. I was trapped in a room full of scripts of my own life, realizing that the father of my children was a man who needed a manual to remember my name. He thought the basement would hold me. He forgot that I was the one who designed the security bypass for this house. 10 minutes later, I walked back into that ballroom. The music had stopped, but the war had just begun. Caspian was on stage, trying to convince the guests that the stranger had been taken away. But he didn't realize I had already swapped the anniversary tribute USB drive. "I'd like to show one last video," I said, my voice projecting with a cold, surgical clarity that stopped him mid-sentence. The giant screen flickered to life. It wasn't photos of our wedding. It was the hidden camera footage from the basement, Caspian practicing his surgical movements with the stabilizer while reading from the manual titled How to be Kaylin. Then, I played the audio of him locking me in the basement just moments ago. The chief of surgery stood up, his face purple with rage. The guests scrambled for their phones. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a viral execution. "I'd like to introduce the real father of my children," I said, pointing to the gaunt man in the trench coat who was now standing by the police at the door. "And the man I am arresting for 10 years of identity theft, medical fraud, and kidnapping." I walked up to the imposter, pulled the $50,000 watch off his wrist, the one I'd bought for a man who didn't exist, and dropped it into a glass of champagne. "The party's over, Caspian, and so is your life." The aftermath was a silent, expensive wreckage. Caspian was let out in the same type of restraint he'd used to keep his brother silenced for a decade. The golden couple was dead, replaced by a headline that would haunt my children for the rest of their lives. The real Kaelin Cyprian was reinstated. We spent the night in the garden, the silence between us heavy with 10 years of lost time. He tried to touch my hand, but I flinched. He had the right face, the right memories, and the right soul, but I had spent a decade loving the shadow he left behind. I had to face the most brutal truth of all. I had been so in love with the perfect version of my life that I had ignored the cracks in the paint. I had seen the thumb scar disappear and chose to believe a lie because the truth was too heavy to carry. Caspian stole a life, but I was the one who let him wear it. Now, I have to figure out if I'm in love with a ghost or if I've spent 10 years becoming a ghost myself. I looked at the grand piano, sitting silent in the moonlight. The imposter was gone, the fraud was exposed, but the music might never sound the same again. Caspian is headed to prison, but the internet is divided. Some are calling Zuri a victim of the ultimate scam, while others are saying she's willfully blind. How do you live with a man for 10 years and not notice he can't play the piano or that a childhood scar disappeared? Was she in on the lie for the money, or was Caspian just that good of a monster? Let me know in the comment section. Identity theft doesn't always happen on your credit card. Sometimes it happens in your own bed. If you believe that scammers like Caspian should always be unmasked, hit that subscribe button and join the inner circle right now. See you on the next one.